Thanks for joining us at this first university session, where the topic is Innovations in Predictive Analysis. My name is Sue Vanderwood, and up to a couple of weeks ago, I was the director of our One Health Institute at Colorado State University. I'm now the dean of our College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences, the best one in the world. And what I'm going to talk about today in my short introduction is a project that the One Health Institute has been sponsoring for a couple of years. And the aim of this study is to use different heterogeneous data streams to more accurately predict and control West Nile virus, which is an endemic infection in the city of Fort Collins. So for this project, we have nearly a dozen laboratories. We've been working with the city of Fort Collins, Larimer County, the state of Colorado, CDC, and we have accumulated laboratories working on different aspects of West Nile virus emergence. This includes evaluation of variants that occur and how those relate to emergence, an assessment of antibodies that occur in backyard chicken eggs as a surveillance tool, assessment of bird and butterfly populations for both the reservoir hosts and the off-target hosts, evaluation of how urbanization over the last decade and a half has resulted in changes in West Nile virus emergence. A very innovative project through two different faculty members in the College of Engineering and the College of, or the Department of Microbiology, that is tracing mosquitoes from their birth as a larva to their death as an adult to assess the traffic patterns of those insects as a better way to evaluate how the viruses might spread from one place to the other. Working with investigators at CDC about new ways to do surveillance that don't involve looking at mosquitoes, and also laboratories that are assessing different control methodologies other than using insecticide permethrin sprays when West Nile virus is detected in mosquitoes. So how can we prevent the infection from occurring in birds, for example, that might mitigate infection? We also have some social science input because we know, looking through a One Health lens, which is the study of programs that involve human, animal, and environmental health, that interdisciplinary approaches are vital. And this type of an outcome, emergence of diseases, is dependent upon human behavior, social behaviors, as well as environmental controls. Engineering solutions are required, and biology is really important to understand as well. So the interdisciplinary lens of One Health has been very vital to our progress. So where we are now is that we are now looking at how to combine and model the heterogeneous data streams, some of which I mentioned in a bit of detail, and then how to analyze those using predictive tools, artificial intelligence, other types of predictive mathematical modeling that Dr. Kirby is going to review in more depth in a few minutes, so that ultimately we can control this particular infection and assist the city in their efforts of preventing infections of humans, horses, raptors, and other off-target species. The deliverables of this project will be to have a pilot project that shows a One Health approach can be successful in mitigating disease emergence, in this case for an infection that we can predict on an annual basis, but we hope to be able to expand this approach to other circumstances and to new areas where we anticipate disease emergence because of climate change and other environmental impacts, and ultimately to make this a long-lasting program with extramural funding that can allow us to continue to make these types of advances through innovative solutions. So with that, I'm going to turn this microphone over to Dr. Michael Kirby.
Thanks, Sue. Well, I think today the need for predictive analytical tools for understanding, predicting, controlling infectious disease is pretty clear to everybody. And if this were a general audience, I'd say you're probably not aware of the fact that the DoD and DARPA in particular has been working to avoid the surprise of a pandemic for decades. I became aware of this through the dialysis-like therapeutics program about a decade ago, and I got very interested in the types of data sets and the work that was going on at DARPA to support these efforts. There have been a lot of programs I've seen. I've been participating in a few, the Prometheus program, the Thor program. These are all really fascinating programs for digging into supporting scientists and interdisciplinary teams to study infectious disease. And I want to say that DARPA has been a really exciting place, the program managers to work with these folks has been really exhilarating, and I think it's helped my research a lot. Infectious disease itself, as we know, is a really hard problem. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this. They've been spending a lot of money to do this, to solve this problem. What makes it so hard is that it requires multidisciplinary teams, right? We have to have folks like veterinarian virologists, engineers, biological scientists working together, applied mathematicians with mathematicians and computer scientists. It's hard because it touches so many different fields. And we need teams to act together, to work together. I think my slide. We need teams to work together to make progress. But what I want to tell you today is that I think that this problem, as challenging as it is, I want to give you evidence that we can solve this problem, okay? That through the interdisciplinary teams that you see, that the ones that are being formed at CSU and joined with other programs across the country and world, that this is a problem that can be solved. And I want to show you a few proof of concept to show that the data, the technology, the information in the data, and the ability to, the computational power to pull out that information, I think we have that now. Okay, so in particular, the Prometheus program set forth this challenge: can you predict that the warfighter is going to become contagious within the first 24 hours of their exposure, after their exposure to infection? And that was the challenge by Matt Hepburn, who's really a wonderful program manager at DARPA. And the idea was, is there enough information in these clinical challenges? Can we show that there are biomarkers that, if we find the right ones, will effectively solve this problem or crack this riddle? And in the picture that you see here under contagion, there are red lines, orange lines, I guess, and blue lines. And everybody in this, so think of a trajectory as a person, and everybody in this experiment was infected with H1N1, and only about half of the people who are actually infected with live virus catch it, right? And the others don't. The orange trajectories are the folks that don't catch it, and the blue they do catch it. And so this is a graph with, let's call them the extracted features. We're using what now we're referring to as machine learning that's explainable because we know what the biology is, or at least we're gaining insights into what the biology is that will allow us to detect which warfighter can be predicted to become contagious well before they are contagious, well before they have any virus in their nose, and before they're showing any symptoms, which is really, I think, the fascinating piece of it. But we can go further than that, and that's where I felt we contributed to the DARPA program. We said, well, if we can predict that you're going to become contagious in the first 24 hours, maybe we can do more. Maybe we can actually determine when you were infected. So I like to call this the time of exposure problem. So if I get your sample, let's say I know you're infected and I want to understand whether I should administer antivirals. Well, then I can use machine learning to identify and use the classification problem to be the time. Okay, the time that you were infected. And it turns out that you can, with fairly high accuracy, 95% accuracy or so on clinical data sets, so let's narrow the scope, I'm able to do that within the 95% accuracy. The data challenge problems you see under tolerance, we see that we have many time series. Folks, our collaborators under the Thor project, the DARPA project, where they were interested in understanding why certain animals did not get sick. Camels don't get sick when you get infected with Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome. If we could understand why these animals didn't get sick, then we could maybe translate that to the warfighter with medical countermeasures. So now the mathematical problem is, how do you understand these time series of mice, temperature activity time series, where they are actually surgically embedded, and you can understand that certain of these collaborative cross mice, they're going to be healthy, and we need to understand why. I think I'm running a little bit out of time, so what I want to do is just to say that the geometry is my specialty in terms of data analytics, how we can understand shape in data, and how we can try to make predictions based on that. And we have a great team also supported by DARPA Geometry of Learning to understand exactly how machine learning works and how we can explain why we're getting the results that we're getting. And now I'd like to pass to Tammy. And Angela.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Tammy Bond. I'm a mechanical and environmental engineer who studies climate and public health via aerosol science, technology, behavior, and infrastructure. So that's a mouthful. And my colleague Angela and I are going to bring you a conversation.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Angela Boscolouth. I'm an infectious disease researcher here at CSU.
Angela, you know that pandemic thing that happened to us?
I vaguely remember.
That wouldn't happen again, would it?
Oh, certainly not, right? No, I think it's only a matter of probably when, not if. And I think what we've learned from COVID certainly can be applied, but we might have some very different features in this next version.
So what surprised me about the pandemic was how slowly we learned. And so not to detract from anything that Michael said, but as people who were involved in that sort of early March 2020, let's see what we can do about this because we have a lot of knowledge already. What was really surprising is how slowly we learned and how quickly we were surprised. It seemed like people kept learning things that were not then applied. We had super spreader events where people would say, well, I guess there must have been a lot of people there, huh? Yeah, so that felt funny to me. It didn't feel like we were in the late stages of a knowledge-intensive society.
I totally agree. I think the technology and the science that immediately rushed to the forefront made great strides. I mean, thinking about a vaccine that was marketable within about a year from the time of the pandemic is amazing. And yet we still, to this day, don't really know how close people should stand in order to prevent infection. And so the lack of kind of knowledge that we need to give people practical measures for how to avoid a contagion is still just not there.
So I think the vaccines were amazing, right? And what I felt was missing was confidence about what to do while we were waiting for that vaccine to happen. People were choosing risk or avoiding risk. Some people took no risk at all. As everybody knows, it was devastating.
Absolutely. And I think there's things that we could do to improve upon this. And one of the first things that we did actually do quite well was figure out methods to detect the pathogen. And if you look on our slide, we've got a couple of examples. There's some historical ways that we've done pathogen detection, but there's modern technologies such as aerosol samplers that really could be better deployed. And then there's other things that we can definitely do to implement really practical measures using the knowledge that we've got from either computational modeling, mathematical modeling, and then experimental modeling, where we can take this kind of what we're calling a bank of representative situations and then use that applied to really any pandemic. It doesn't have to be COVID. It could be the next best thing that's coming up in the future. But we have the information there. We just need to have a better way to characterize, model, and then predict how can we respond to that, and can we respond fast enough to make it so that we don't have another pandemic, maybe just a small outbreak next time.
I think one of the other surprising things to me was that even though we know that we need statistics, we need data analytics to be able to look at these problems, what was kind of missing from that was the fact that there are physical and biological principles that all need to come together, and they weren't really coming together. And I think that's what we can prepare for if we do our homework. So we were hearing people talk about, is it airborne or is it touch, as if these were binary things. But we know that viruses are aerosols and they travel and there are principles of fluid flow. And yes, they are statistical and there's statistics of rare events and so on. But somehow it got missed that just that rarity doesn't mean that they don't behave physically.
Absolutely. And so some of the things that we definitely need to think about is what that physical environment looks like. And also some of the things that we need to consider is how do we actually track a pathogen in real time, or even not a pathogen, but any sort of an environmental contaminant. So Tammy, maybe it comes down to better contact tracing.
Well, the problem with contact tracing is you don't know what else people are exposed to. So you don't know if it actually came from that person they had dinner with, or if it could have been any one of a number of things. One of the things we ran into, and this is a ripe area for ethicists to think about, was privacy, right? We could not do as close contact tracing as we wanted because of privacy. I'm not saying we should get away from privacy because I think we value the society we have. But what if we knew enough about physics representative situations like you're talking about, that we knew where it would show up and we could selectively trace. And we could identify groups of people that maybe had limited movement over a period of time and hone in on them to tell us what kind of thing we were dealing with.
And that brings up a great point. And some of the things that we already know are that places like wild animal markets are going to be a hotspot for infections. So one of the things that perhaps we could think about, and to avoid the privacy issue, is to look at epidemiology and kind of the overall trend of disease patterns. So perhaps instead of standing there and asking people to take their temperatures every time they walk in and out of a market, we could look at the clinics around that and have perhaps a better way to map, oh, there's 17 people who came in with a fever one day after being to the market. We could use predictive modeling, advanced mathematical computational models, some of the things that Dr. Kirby's been working on to tell us where we have hot spots, and then we could start investigating without interfering with people's privacy, but based off of trends in what's happening epidemiologically.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I think the synthesis is really what's missing. So, for example, there were forms of information that were limited, and they were completely tossed out. But people know how to integrate those kinds of information. For example, if you make a questionnaire, we know that people respond more like they wish they would have been. And yet, we could fuse different forms of data to give us a better take on it. And so I really think we can do better because we have a lot more understanding of physics. We have a lot better detection. When the original disease transmission airborne work was done, people couldn't even measure aerosols. We're so much better than that now. And as we know, we can do science that's rooted in respect.
So we can take a little bit of the individual variability out of things and, again, respect people's privacy by really using the statistics and the big data and data science analytics to kind of measure what we think is going to be a place where we need to start implementing more practical change.
And I think then, if we had this learning thing set up so we could classify the type of outbreak that we were seeing, then we could quickly design a response. So we could decide whether it was difficult or unwise to be cloistered with other people without masking. But that doesn't have to be everything. Remember in the beginning days of the pandemic, you couldn't touch anything, you couldn't breathe, you couldn't talk to anybody. And if we could have had some clarity on that sooner, the mental burden would also have been much lower. So I feel like we just need to do the homework of preparation before it happens again.
Yeah. And I think some of that still starts at detection. And we have these better detection methods. We have some ability to be predictive. So the quicker that we can get this information on the science side, the quicker we can disseminate the information to the public about what they actually should do about it.
I think there's also, the learning network needs to include dissemination. And it needs to include how people receive information. So you have a lot of uncertainties at the beginning, and you're learning. I think there was a lot of pushback about, oh no, don't say something different because people can't handle that. If people know that we're learning, then I think people can learn to adapt.
Absolutely. And one of the things that that's going to take is really a push towards being more multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, all of these things that mean that we need a team of people, not just the scientists who can rarely figure out how to talk to anybody on a normal level, let's be honest, but we need people who can help to actually spread the word and make sure that we have a team that knows how to talk to everybody and how to get that information out there.
And so we have initiatives like that, right? Like the one Sue was talking about. We have
Absolutely.
The Broaden Network here at CSU. There's a lot of multidisciplinary work going on around the country. It's not all focused on outbreaks, but it is focused on principles. And I guess I'd say it sounds really hard, right? If you had told me 5 years ago that we would need to set up a classification system and then a response system, I would have said nobody's going to fund that. But if we look at the cost of what's happened to us, and not just the economic cost, but the cost in fear, the cost in people who have fallen to the other side of the line, it really feels like we can't afford not to do that.
Exactly. And so some of the initiatives that we have here at CSU and other places involve these big teams that kind of goes back to the roots of basic science, figure out what we know, and then figure out how to get that information out to people in general. So,
Thank you.
great. Thank you so much for your time.
Also joining us from CSU, Dr. Karen Hamilton, Dr. Amy Charkowski, Dr. James Hurl, and Dr. Brian Wilson.
Good morning. It's wonderful to be here. I'm Karen Hamilton. I'm from the Center for Healthy Aging and the Department of Health and Exercise Science, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation about adaptation to stress with Amy.
So hi, Karen. It's nice to be here with you today. My name's Amy Charkowski. I'm a professor and the head of agricultural biology at Colorado State University. So Karen, I understand you work with studying stress in animals with both model organisms as well as companion dogs. I'd like to hear more.
Absolutely. I'd love to talk about it. So since the first dogs were launched into space in the 50s, we've learned so much about challenges against human health during spaceflight. And some of the things that we've learned over the years include identification of a set of molecular drivers of adaptation to the stresses encountered during spaceflight. These include macromolecular damage, mitochondrial dysfunction leading to metabolic disorders, lack of mechanisms to maintain protein homeostasis, epigenetic changes, and telomere shortening. And these are all part of the adaptation to stress. One of the things that I think is really interesting, because my lab studies aging, is that aging biology research has led to the same conclusions. The very same molecular drivers that are involved in adaptation to stresses in space are also involved in driving cellular aging. So without being too over the top, you can really think of space flight as an accelerator of aging. And that you can bring that back to Earth, because there's lots of things right now that accelerate cellular aging. For example, prolonged physical inactivity, poor nutrition, and even some infectious organisms. So without doubt, in space, there's going to be stresses that are much greater to humans than on Earth. For example, ionizing radiation, disruptions in gravity, confined, isolated space or environments for a long period of time. And we do need to accelerate our understanding of what happens when we layer those stresses on with cellular aging, because we have an aging globe on top of that. However, aging biology research right now is really giving us a lot of growth to our understanding of how we can promote beneficial adaptations to stress in cells and kind of abrogate the maladaptive stresses. So my group, and others around the country are really dedicated to trying to find interventions that can help to promote this beneficial stress adaptation. And we've made a lot of progress in the laboratory. So pharmacological approaches, nutritional approaches, and physical activity work pretty well in the laboratory to extend health span. However, unfortunately, the translation of those laboratory findings to tangibly increase human health in response to those stresses associated with aging and changes in environments have been really limited. So you might be interested to know that there's a group of us at CSU affiliated with the Center for Healthy Aging as well as the vet school, who believe that one of the bigger barriers to really making progress in translational research to understand adaptation to stress is this deep-seated reliance on laboratory models that don't really mimic the complexities and the multimorbidities of the human condition. So to circumvent this problem, what we think a good solution is to look back to our companion dogs. So we think that companion dogs and companion animals in general can be a really good sentinel for human health. They live right by our side, they're exposed to the same environment, therefore they're exposed to the same stresses. And they do seem to have very similar cellular adaptations to those stresses as humans do. And I think a big unknown is how can we gird humans and their companion animals to withstand and adapt to stresses in the conditions of prolonged space flight and to live healthy lives both in space and when they return. And I think nutrition is a really big part of that. And I think plant nutrition in particular, high quality protein plant nutrition is going to be a barrier as well. I understand your department kind of studies this. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, so as with animals, stress dramatically affects plants as well. And if humans go into space, we'll have to learn how to farm there, right? And so stress can affect, well, there's really, I think, three things we need to think about for growing plants in space, and stress is a big part of that. So stress will affect the development of plants, and when they're really stressed, they may not even produce the part that we want to eat. It also dramatically affects their immune system, which means that they could become more susceptible to plant diseases. They may not interact with beneficial microbes as they should, and they can even be colonized by human pathogens, which is definitely not something we want on our food. So we've had one faculty member in our department look at, for example, growing plants in mimicked Martian soil and found that they grow better with added microbes, but we don't know how the stress of space would change that relationship. A second thing we really need to think about is just straight up plant breeding. So on Earth, we breed plants for the environment that we grow them in, and it affects, again, their development, how they resist disease, and how they handle stress. And we can't really mimic that environment here. So if we want to go to space, we're going to have to set up a plant breeding program. And then a third thing we need to think about with growing food is the whole system. So we probably won't eat the entire plant. We might have roots or stems or something left over. So what do you do with that? And here we may bring it back to the soil for the microbes to decompose or compost, and we see that insects and fungi are part of that system. So if we want to have a full system in space, we'll need to include microbes, probably fungi, insects perhaps, and fungi and insects are also edible, but they also have immune systems that will be affected by stress. And so a big thing that our college and department does is look at this entire system and how do the microbes affect plant health, how do insects affect plant health, for example. And so anyway, I find these questions really exciting to think about, and I think this work could really help us grow food both in space and on Earth. So
That's really cool.
okay. So yeah.
Right. Good morning, everyone. My name's Jim Hurl, and in addition to the title on the screen, I'm a professor of atmospheric science at Colorado State University. Thank you so much for coming, and it's a pleasure to be sharing the stage today with my colleagues and Dr. Brian Wilson, who's the executive director of the Energy Institute at Colorado State University. And as a climate scientist, Brian, I wanted to start off this conversation by noting that increasingly conclusive evidence shows that climate change is increasing global conflicts. So it really has profound implications for national security. Response pathways include mitigation, carbon dioxide removal, and sequestration, as well as adaptation. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how CSU's Energy Institute contributes to this global need.
Sure, thank you, Jim. And thank you all for coming out today. The Energy Institute here at CSU is comprised of almost 250 faculty members and investigators from all across the campus. While we certainly have a strong focus on science and technology, we do work on energy policy. We have faculty members in psychology, sociology, anthropology, working on behavioral aspects of energy. We even have an energy humanities program. And while most of the faculty are located here on the main campus, we also have a physical facility, a 100,000 square foot facility called Powerhouse, just a mile north of campus. It's called Powerhouse because it began its life 30 years ago when I took over an abandoned coal-fired power plant for the facility that has now grown to become a really one-of-a-kind facility working on large-scale energy systems. So we, here at CSU, the Energy Institute, we really have a focus on this concept of solutions at scale. Certainly, we do good science, and a lot of universities do great science, but we then really have this mantra of basically taking that science, turning it into tangible solutions, and then working with industry or other groups or partners to get solutions implemented at scale. Some of the solutions we've worked on, essentially the work we've done on industrial engines, is now used essentially on every engine on the U.S. pipeline system, and that reduces NOx emissions in the U.S. by the same amount as removing about 150 million automobiles from the highway. Our Power Systems Research Lab was originally funded by the government of Denmark to figure out how to use wind energy more effectively in Denmark. The solutions that we worked on at Integrid are now in use on the Danish grid, and that's enabled Denmark over the last 15 years to go from getting 20% of their energy from renewables to the last 2 years, they've gotten over 50% of their energy from renewables. We also work on energy access in developing nations. And the solutions we've developed for energy access and for clean cooking have impacted the lives of over 15 million people. We've now really expanded our focus from just energy solutions to climate solutions. Certainly anything we do in energy has a climate impact, but there's lots of climate solutions that aren't energy related. A great example of that is soil carbon, where we can, if we can change the way plants work and agriculture is done, we could take more of the CO2 that the plants are harvesting, push that in the soil, and have an impact on about 20% of the carbon emissions. And right now, about a third of our climate forcing is from methane. We have large programs on methane emissions from both oil and gas and even from agriculture. So we've certainly focused on this issue of turning down the knob, but as a climate scientist, you realize that mitigation is essential. So I know you work in climate intervention. Can you tell us what that is and why now is the time to research it, and how might that fit into the climate solution space?
Sure, thank you very much, Brian. And so yes, as a climate scientist, I just want to really emphasize that the approaches that Brian's outlining, mitigation, things like carbon dioxide removal, those are the solutions to climate change. That's absolutely what we have to do. And we really see the importance of this increasing in our everyday lives when we just look at the disruptions that climate change is producing to environmental and social systems. The vast majority of these changes, these impacts from climate change, are disruptive, damaging, and threaten our national security in a number of ways. And many of the climate change impacts are really truly unprecedented and are accelerating. And some of these impacts, like sea level rise, are already irreversible on timescales of century to millennia. So mitigation efforts are critical. This is what we have to do. But unfortunately, when we look at sort of a global scale, current mitigation efforts are very likely to be too small and too slow to reach the goals of things like the Paris Climate Agreement, which is really centered around trying to limit climate warming to 2 degrees or less, preferably around 1.5 degrees. And when I say 1.5 degrees, that's an increase in global temperatures relative to pre-industrial temperatures. The United Nations Environmental Program, for instance, just released a report that says that if all of the nations implement the pledges that they made as part of the Paris Agreement, the warming that we will experience is about 2.7 degrees by the year 2100. So the chances are pretty high that we're going to exceed the Paris Agreement temperature goals. So that really brings into play this topic of climate intervention. Climate intervention, broadly defined as the intentional modification of the planetary scale environment in order to reduce the impacts of climate change. Climate intervention does involve things like carbon dioxide removal approaches, but what we're really beginning to focus on here at CSU is a more controversial side of climate intervention, and it's called solar radiation modification. Maybe you are familiar with the term solar geoengineering or solar climate intervention. And the idea is to consider a variety of approaches that may reflect a small percentage of incoming solar radiation into the planet and thereby cool the planet. But very little is known about the risks as well as the benefits of these approaches, how it might impact weather and climate patterns around the world, how it might impact natural and managed ecosystems. There are huge governance issues, as one might imagine, who gets to control the global thermostat, as well as a number of ethical and moral issues. So it's a very complex topic that we're starting to study. Brian, I was wondering if I might ask you in return, I know there's been many attempts to apply the DARPA model to other fields. One of these is ARPA-E, the Advanced Research Projects Energy. You were a program director at ARPA-E. How was the ARPA model adapted for energy?
Well, yeah, thanks, Jim. It was my pleasure to serve as a program director at ARPA-E from 2012 to 2016. I stayed on as for an additional 3 years managing some industry partnerships. Maybe first to talk about the similarities. Both agencies use a model of using empowered program directors that come in for a limited period of time to identify important problems, hit them with high risk, high reward programs, work with high performing teams and to try to not only develop solutions, but to get those to the point of having impact. Differences, however, are that on how that scale up occurs. The ARPA-E solutions really have to compete in the open energy markets, so we have a very strong focus on technology to markets. And where we basically work with the companies to figure out how we can, whether it's build a business or figure out how to translate that to the point that it has impact. The one thing I would like to say is that the experience of being a program director was just an awesome experience. I was on loan from the university, and it was I wasn't, I certainly had things going on at the time, but it was an opportunity to work with some of the smartest people in the room on energy solutions, worked with great teams, very strong set of bonds between the program directors and the CETAs and the entire team. So I would certainly urge faculty members to think about considering a stint at DARPA, ARPA-E, or one of the other ARPAs that are now forming. So, back to you, Jim. How are we advancing knowledge of climate intervention here at CSU, and how do CSU efforts fit into the national landscape of research on the topic?
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, and I'll keep the answer relatively brief because I know we're starting to get short on time. But the national landscape is really, I think, being shaped right now. There was a National Academy of Sciences report that was released just a little more than a year ago that really recommends that the U.S. invest in this area of solar radiation modification, SRM research, and implement a transdisciplinary research program as an important component of the nation's overall portfolio of climate change research. So this is really just underway, and we at CSU are receiving some DARPA funding to begin to look at this. Advocating for CSU, I think this is the perfect kind of institution to do research on this topic because we not only have expertise in weather and climate science here, but hydrology, human and animal health, agricultural, terrestrial ecosystems and the like. So we really can address many of the transdisciplinary research goals that are highlighted in this National Academy study. What my group is focused on here is one particular kind of solar radiation modification, It's probably the most technically feasible and promising approach if we were to consider doing this kind of an intervention in the climate system, and it's called stratospheric aerosol injection. And the idea is very much a strong natural analog to this are explosive volcanic eruptions that inject aerosols into the upper atmosphere, reflect solar radiation, and after these kinds of volcanic eruptions, we see that the planet cools for a period of maybe a year or so and up to about a half a degree. So the idea behind this is, could we just keep pumping these kind of aerosols into the stratosphere and cool the planet down? With our DARPA funding, we are using explainable AI techniques to detect and understand the impacts of this kind of an approach on weather and climate, whether it helps us avoid so-called tipping points in the climate system or introduces new tipping points. And I'll conclude with, I think, the last element that is very interesting, is there's an increasing possibility of, I believe, unilateral deployment of this by nations, by actors to improve their own climate state, even if it caused risk to others. So we're employing game theory to develop plausible geopolitical type scenarios. So with that, I think that we're out of time, and I think speaking for any of us on the stage, we look forward to further discussions during the breaks and in the hallways. So thank you very much.
Please welcome to the stage U.S. Congressman for Colorado's 2nd District, Joe Neguse.
Good afternoon, or good morning, I should say. It is great to be back here in Fort Collins. Thank you all for having me today. First, let me thank the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency Director, Dr. Stephanie Tompkins, who I had a chance to visit with just a few moments ago, for inviting me to attend this important Forward conference, as well as to former DARPA Director and current Chief Technology Officer for Lockheed Martin, Dr. Stephen Walker, and of course, Colorado State University Vice President for Research, Dr. Alan Rudolph, for their efforts in putting together this terrific event. I speak on behalf of many Coloradans, and certainly all those in Colorado's 2nd Congressional District, when I say that we are very excited to host you all at Colorado State University in the heart of Colorado's 2nd Congressional District. As you all know, DARPA Forward is taking national security innovation on the road, helping to connect new communities of talent with world-renowned scientists, accomplished innovators, and senior defense leaders as we work to re-energize American innovation and technology. And I certainly couldn't be more grateful for the group of distinguished individuals who are gathered here today in Fort Collins to have these incredibly productive and robust debates, discussions, and conversations. Right now, in my view, couldn't be a better time for this conference, with the federal government taking several significant steps over the course of really just the last 12 weeks to bolster our domestic innovation sectors. I know you all know this well, but from production and manufacturing to research and technology, we have made great strides over the course of this year and in the 117th Congress to grow our industries domestically and strengthen American competitiveness, all to help deliver the U.S. technological advantage. Just this month alone, today is the last day of August. In the past 31 days, the President of the United States signed into law both the CHIPS and Science Act, a bill to strengthen our economic and national security through semiconductor innovation, manufacturing, removing roadblocks to attracting scientific investment across America, and boosting resilience in U.S. supply chains. Later today, we'll be welcoming the Speaker of the House, Speaker Pelosi, to Colorado in a different part of the 2nd Congressional District to highlight that very law and the impact it will have on our federal labs and domestic manufacturing here in our state. But we also, the President also signed into law the Inflation Reduction Act, which will deliver significant investments for clean energy production and scientific innovation. So again, when I think about the timing of this particular conference, I don't know that you could come up with a better time to host it. As we just heard in the last panel, and I caught the tail end of it and wish that they could have gone on for even longer, certainly a fascinating topic in terms of the geopolitical ramifications of potential interventions in the climate. And of course, there are scientists at NOAA and NCAR and UCAR about 50 miles, 40 miles south of here, who are literally doing this research as we speak. But as we heard, and as you're about to hear from the folks who will discuss resilience, in this country, we are incredibly lucky to have intelligent, forward thinkers who are working to better our systems and improve our quality of life, and again, enhance our national security. And I'm certainly grateful to the students and the teachers and the universities like Colorado State that are taking on these great feats. So again, I want to applaud everyone here today, the entire agency, for your dedication to your work, and urge you all to continue having the conversations that you were having over the course of this week. With people like you fueling this work, I am sure that there are thousands of breakthroughs literally just right on the horizon. So again, thank you all for being here. And with that being said, I'm now proud to welcome the panelists for the next panel, Resilience, Building Workforce and Operations Resilience. Thanks again.
And for our last CSU panel, Dr. Craig Partridge, Dr. Steve Simsky, Dr. Deanna Davalos, and Dr. Lisa Youngblade.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you to the Congressman for a nice introduction getting us going. We're the panel on resilience, building the workforce, and operations resilience. And this is going to consist of two discussions, first one between myself and Steve, the second one between Deanna and Lisa. And so I think I'll just kick it off here and talk a tiny bit about what we're doing in the computer science department related to building workforce, and then we'll move on to resilience aspects and high tech. So we're one of the leading programs in the United States in trying to bring women into computer science. When I got here 4 years ago, we were abysmal. We were at about 12% women in our program. We're now well over 20% and on our way to our goal of somewhere between 40 and 50% women in the computer science program. And one of the questions, I want to acknowledge we're getting tremendous support from the Northeastern Center for Inclusive Computing. It's giving us the substantial funding that makes that kind of change possible. People tend to think diversity is easy and cheap, and if you just brief everybody, all will go right. It's not our experience at all. We've been spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on our diversity program to make the changes. And one of the big changes has been in our curriculum and making our courses more inclusive. And I will say for many people that's a code word of, oh, you've changed the courses to make them easier. And the answer is no, that's not the problem. The problem is that many courses actually tell the students essentially you shouldn't be here. So if you're in computing, you're familiar with the fact that for years we taught almost all of our computer science examples using mathematics examples as sort of the motivation for the computing software. That tells everybody they need to know mathematics and they need to love mathematics if they're going to do computer science. But many of our students are showing up because they want to do something other than that. They want to do visualization, they want to do data analysis. And so one of the things we've done is change our courses so that in every course we seek to have at least one assignment or example that speaks to each student's distinct interest in the course. And that's what we've done to bring more people into the program, and it's been our biggest success. So I don't know if you want to add your perspective on diversity here.
Yeah, no, that's a great perspective, and I think we're in systems engineering. Most of our students are spread out throughout the country. So in some ways, it's a little easier for us to get a very diverse group because we can actually set that up through our DEI committees within our department, which we do. We have subcommittees there for bringing in new students. We have a culture committee. We have a committee for hiring and for bringing those in. But the key thing is that this is not something that is doing a favor to students coming in. Building on what Craig said, diversity in students, which includes veterans, right? It's not just a matter of what somebody's skin color is or their cultural background. It can be their age, it can be their life experience, it can be their gender, it can be their sex. All of those things play into this. Having a wide group of students in terms of diversity brings us diversity in terms of our curriculum. It is a feed-forward type of situation and, if you will, a positive feedback situation where when we bring in diverse students, we actually improve the breadth and the depth of our curriculum. And in doing so, we're able to then offer that kind of a curriculum to the students moving forward. And this is a really key part of why diversity is such a hot topic today. Of course there's the equity, of course there's the trying to change the social injustices that have occurred over history, but it's actually better for everyone. This is not something that we don't benefit from as a university. And we've seen this pulling in students from all branches of military. 55% in systems engineering are from aerospace, for example. So I'm having to like scrub those parts of my brain that have forgotten the aerospace industry back in my NASA days and kind of clean those up. Again, that's the point. Bringing in those diverse students, the students with different types of perspectives on stuff, makes our curriculum better and makes us more able to offer then that improved curriculum going forward. So again, diversity of workforce, diversity of student mix leads to diversity of curriculum, and I think that's very important to note. The other thing I'll note before I hand it back to Craig for sort of the operations side of this is when we're looking at education now, unless I'm missing something, Udemy, Coursera, those all exist. The university has to offer an up game for that. And that is metacognition. And all of my classes are involved with how do you actually learn how to learn in this area. So my cybersecurity class, Craig and I both work in cybersecurity. I work in cyber physical security and security systems. We need to let the students know this is how you continue learning in this space. You think cybersecurity is going to be static for the next couple of years? The Russians and Chinese are just going to wait for us to catch up with them? Of course not. So metacognition is a big thing, and we get that from having students who are mid-career, even late career, and want to use this to go forward. And so I fully agree with what Craig's saying here. We end up with a much more diverse group if we're open to it.
Yeah, and I want to just follow up on something Steve said about the metacognition. It's tremendously important. People have to be able to teach themselves. But it's also true that life sometimes makes that difficult, right? You know, for those of you who have children, think about when they were small. Think about how much time you had in the evening to teach yourself a new skill, right? You didn't have much, right? Sometimes you could sort of force yourself to do it by signing up for an evening course or something like that, and we have a wonderful program here of online courses at CSU that meet some of that need. But a lot of it also ends up falling into the workplace at certain points in your life. And that's an area actually where, I mean, CSU is delighted to help in terms of doing educational offerings and working with employers on trying to help their workforce learn. But I think it's also a place where actually DARPA has a role to play going forward. You guys in DARPA know better than I think anybody else in the United States, perhaps the world, where some of the future skill set needs are. Certainly that's been a conversation in corridors at DARPA for years when I've been there. Encouraging your contractors to try to propagate those skills within your workforce is something that I think DARPA could do fruitfully and would help us tremendously in this problem of helping the technical workforce where the basic skills that we teach now will be obsolete in 15 to 20 years, most of them, other than learning, right? You'll be using a new computing language in most cases. Okay, I know you've still got Fortran code running in military systems, all right? But for most of the world, they're going to be learning new technologies, they're going to be learning new programming languages. The need to learn machine learning now has transformed the field. Machine learning is going from being an obscure niche to sort of an essential skill for most computer scientists. You know, causing people to learn those skills, to go out, have their employers encourage it, I think is something that we need to be putting greater attention to going forward. I don't know if that matches your view, Steve, or you've got...
No, absolutely, and I can segue off of that. I think one of the biggest things, so I'm in systems engineering, we look at how systems work in systems engineering. It comes right off of what software does and right off of what my background, biomedical engineering, does in terms of treating things as a system that we can build from. So for resilient networks, again, having a diverse set of testing and measurement that's going on, a diverse way of looking at things, we borrow from the computer science area the red team, blue team. This is familiar to those of you in cybersecurity, and we have teams that are specifically trying to attack the infrastructure, other teams that are learning from them and going back to that. That has led to the generation of what are called generative adversarial networks, or GANs, which we're also using to generate synthetic images. I'm doing that with the US Air Force with a team and a company. And those actually play right into how the research gets better. So again, if we're looking at how to structure this, the structure actually can roll back into the research. And a lot of us think the other way. We think, oh, the research is going to determine the structure. And we start off with the technology first and then go to building the systems. What we do in systems engineering is we deconstruct it the other way, just like good software engineers like Craig and his teams do. You deconstruct the system, don't even consider the technology until you've figured out how you're going to solve that problem. And of course, we can work backwards to it, but the nice thing is, as Craig said, let's suppose, heaven forfend, Python goes away tomorrow, and we're using something else other than that to bring people up to speed on software. It's okay. That's not the solution. That's a technology that leads into that. And I think that's a big part of building a resilient workforce. They understand that they need to be agnostic to the specific technologies, even though they may have put in the last 2 years becoming the world's most proficient expert in some application or some programming language, et cetera. That isn't going to work against you down the road. It's going to give you those skills to be able to go and become the world's expert in whatever's next. But deconstructing those systems and building them backwards, this is a huge part of what I saw all day yesterday and what I've seen so far this morning of what DARPA does. You look at the solutions, you're not enamored with the technology, you're enamored with solving the problem. That's how we get a resilient workforce. People who want to solve the problem first, work backwards to the technology.
I think we're in complete agreement here, and it's time to turn it over to the other half of the panel.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much. Deanna and I will be talking about building workforce and resilience from the perspective of mental and behavioral health. So again, a theme that kicked off the conference on Monday was the focus on mental wellness and mental health. And so that while disorders and diseases are critically important to treat and to think about, we're in this optimal time frame right now to really flip that narrative around and start thinking about how we build resilience, how we build wellness, how we build mental and behavioral health. So as we're talking, keep an image in your mind. Picture a pyramid. At that base of the pyramid, the stronger that base is, the stronger that pyramid's going to be. Think about the top of the pyramid as the most critical, important things that we need to treat that require the most expenditure of resource. That right there, that top of the pyramid, is how we think about mental and behavioral health right now. What we're trying to do is engineer workforce training programs and thinking about how we treat that really takes opportunity of the base to build the resilient skills that we can attend to the top of the pyramid, but we don't focus all our resources there. So think about words like wellness, resilience, grit, as well as treating conditions and disorders. And it's really exciting to do this in the context of a university because there's some similarities between the populations in the military and the populations at a university. So Deanna, could you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. So I think this is a unique time in development in terms of between 18 and 25 is when the vast majority of mental disorders emerge, and that's globally. And most of those happen in terms of first onset. I think about by 63% of first onset happens by the age of 25, and the majority is between 18 and 25. So like Lisa was mentioning, it's a unique opportunity. It's a unique burden and a unique opportunity. As people probably already know, universities are sort of overwhelmed right now with the needs for mental health services and not being able to meet them. But it's also a very unique opportunity to work on skill building and adaptation and resilience, metacognition also, about thinking about where they are in the world and how they can be in a better place at universities and in the military. So you can sort of view it as both. I want to be sort of optimistic that this is a very unique opportunity to take people from day one and start working on mental health skill building. Right now we don't do this. There's a lot of stigma. We typically wait until somebody is at a breaking point, but there is plenty of literature to suggest that we could start doing this much more proactively. So some of the things that we'll talk about is that we need to really start infusing prevention, early identification, and skill building in our trainees who are across colleges trying to find different ways to help with mental health problems. And we really need to be addressing it from day one, so that the moment you step on this campus, we're going to start building some of your skills to help with the changes that are just inherently part of university. And I'm going to hand it off and ask Lisa to tell us a little bit more about ideas of how we can do that.
Yeah, so as we're talking right now, we're in the midst of this really exciting re-envisioning at CSU, thinking about how do we take our mental and behavioral healthcare framework and kind of flip it to a new way of training workforce that is not solely at the top of the pyramid, that thinks about different levels of the pyramid and doesn't replicate that pyramid 15 times across 15 different types of training programs. So what if we coalesced our 15-ish mental and behavioral health training and research-oriented outreach programs at CSU into an integrated whole? What would that look like? What if we took the perspective of interprofessional education very seriously to get us out of training silos, but to integrate not only among mental and behavioral health fields, but also with allied fields. Like, what if we had our medical students involved in this? What if we had our veterinary students involved with this? Because access to service starts with all of us in all our fields, and so having a baseline training and integrated approach could be really exciting. So this gets us out of our training silos. And what if we stopped thinking about that very top where you have to have a PhD and 2 years of internship experience and then 2,000 hours? We still need those folks. But what if we added new credentials that didn't need a master's or a PhD, that we started thinking about wellness coaching, for example, at that low level to try and mitigate some of the need for the higher level? And what if, my last point, we kind of started normalizing this as a health field? That is not a disorder field. It's a health field as important as nutritional health, as important as physical health, and we integrated it into a silo that brought all those fields together in an integrated health concept. So I'm really excited about that and the human factors part, but there's other things we should be thinking about.
Definitely, I think being on this panel, it's nice to be with the other panel members. Technology is something that has to play a role. So we have spent a lot of time in psychology, I think, talking about how technology has sort of been a detriment in some ways to mental health in young adults. And we know empirically that there's some evidence for that. But I think we need to try and sort of capitalize on technology and comfort with technology in that age range in terms of interventions and finding ways to connect with students that may not be the traditional face-to-face with a counselor. We haven't done a great job of that. I think we're trying at CSU. There are some opportunities that are not necessarily being capitalized on. We have an online platform called You at CSU that interacts with students. They're able to look at all different types of topics for things that are relevant to them. Sometimes that leads them down the pathway of mental health support, but right now we're not really tracking them, and I could see a time where we very much encourage that to our students, and we destigmatize that if you need to go to that route and look and see what's available to you, that if we could get information from students on what's helping and what's not, we could pair with computer science, with engineering, start coming up with predictive modeling of, look, students who come in and are homesick and also have sort of maybe some anxiety in their families, they did this, and that kept them from developing a diagnosable mental disorder. I don't believe that those disorders all have to occur, that 63% that happens from 18 to 25. I think it's because we don't identify it and people don't seek help that things that are risk factors become diagnosable disorders. But I think if we did a better job of identifying what works and what doesn't work, we could avoid quite a bit of that for our students, for the military. I also think that we need to integrate technology-based interventions much more than we currently do in terms of training behavioral health workers. So right now it's sort of this traditional face-to-face counseling, and then you have this whole world that exists in VR or app-based, but it's really not integrated in terms of our training. So our counselors are not skilled in knowing when to use those, when to recommend those. That with a platform like you at CSU could triage to where we're getting people the skills that they need early on, and we're saving maybe those person-to-person sessions for people for whom that's what they want and that's what they need, rather than having this backlog of people not getting their needs met. So I think one of the things that we need to address in terms of being involved in training the workforce is integrating technology much better. And I think that we have to remember that a lot of our trainees also fall in that 18 to 25 age range and are at our high risk for developing psychological disorders. So having that be part of their training, where they get VR-based mindfulness, can't hurt them, and then they're able to maybe better pick people who would be well suited for some of those technologies that we're not currently using. So I think we have the resources. I think we have people on this campus that are very interested. I think the implications for university students, but also for the military, is really limitless in terms of coming up with better customized care. So I'm hoping that's something that we do, is that we think about how to integrate this and how to take advantage of resources that we already have on campus.
Absolutely, and resources is a great way to segue into the last point we want to make that's relevant to building resilience, and that's research. So one of the brilliant aspects of being at a university, and especially at a land-grant university where our mission is problem solving, that we can wrap our research capabilities around these core mental and behavioral health issues, so we can know what evidence base means. When we say it, we know it. We can train that way, and we can partner in interesting ways. So I just want to tell you quickly about 2 partnerships that we've done. One with ROTC. We've been working for a long time to provide evidence that and a scientific database about why certain training works. We're now building in a psychological hardiness construct into that, so not just physical training, not just nutritional training, but also psychological hardiness. A doctoral student working on this in our Department of Health and Exercise Science. We also have done work with the 10th group, Special Forces group at Fort Carson, looking at the POTIF model of integrating spiritual health, social health, psychological health, and physical health in a training program that they do, and showing that integrating concept actually does what the operators tell it does. It does make a difference. It does improve resilience. It does improve performance. It does improve psychological and social health. People involved in it know it. Their commanders know it. How do we make the case? To continue that work, we need science and evidence to support it. So we're really excited about that work. You've heard core concepts like resilience, like grit. Think about those things as important as disorders are, as mental health, and addressing core things like depression and suicide and addictions. We also need to be thinking about the human drivers, needs for belongingness, needs for mattering, needs for meaning. That is part of building a healthy workforce, and that is what we're really excited about here at CSU.